Come and read more of my works on the website under Yuan. Keywords of the novel. Blood Fox Resentment with no pop-ups. Download the complete collection of Blood Fox Resentment TXT, and read the latest chapter of Blood Fox Resentment. Chapter 1. Bell Summoning Soul. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1. Bell Summoning Soul. Since I moved to Lingyun community, my neighbors in the community have always looked at me with a strange expression, whether they go out or come back, and said, "Come back, it's good to be back." This was originally a greeting from the neighbors, but strangely, their expressions when they said it were a bit wooden, and after they finished speaking, it seemed like they didn't remember saying hello to me again. They looked at me cautiously and hurriedly left. Even more so, sometimes children would look at me with that hollow and indifferent expression, like an elderly person looking at me with relief, saying, "Come back, it's good to be back." It made me feel uneasy, so I tried to go in and out with my roommate Yang Hui as much as possible. On this day when I came back, I met several people like this along the way. Although I was walking with Yang Hui, those people walked up to me in a daze, their eyes fixed on me, and they said these words softly. Yang Hui looked at me with a smile and said, "You're really going home, you're all acquaintances." When we arrived at the doorstep, there was a rectangular white paper bag on the doorknob with the words, "Yun Miao" written on it with a brush. That paper bag is not big, palm-wide, long, and without a handle, as if it was covered with snow. White paper on its own. The width is just right on the door handle, standing straight. The two characters, Yun Miao, are in the simplified form of a Wei stele, written on a narrow and long white paper surface, and standing on the door handle. Behind it is a dark red entrance door, which looks a bit like a plaque, causing me to panic. Just as I saw the paper bag, I vaguely heard a faint male voice say, "Come back." I quickly glanced aside and saw nothing except for the empty hallway and the pitch-black stairs. Yang Hui was already in a hurry to enter the door. She picked up the white paper bag and glanced at it, saying, "Yun Miao, you've only been moving here for a few days now, and someone with a crush has already sent something." It was written with a brush, definitely a genius. She quickly pulled out the contents inside, which was a solid wood red box carved with cloud patterns. She chuckled at me and said, "It's quite tasteful. Let me help you take a look. Don't move around." I have been inexplicably greeted by those neighbors recently, which has made me feel uneasy, especially when I look at paper bags that seem like white paper used to paste paper figures, which makes my heart even tighter. Yang Hui had already opened the box and exclaimed excitedly. I saw a black satin lining the wooden box, and inside lay a pure gold bracelet. The color looked a bit old, but the bracelet was carved with auspicious cloud patterns, and there were also 3 lotus-shaped bells hanging from it. This is really beautiful. Nowadays, retro style is popular. Is this pure gold one? At least 50 or 60 grams, right? It's really tasteful and rich. Yang Hui was holding the bracelet and swaying towards me with a dazzling light in her eyes. With a surprised expression on his face, he said, "If someone gives me a bracelet like this, whether it's a person or a ghost, I'm willing to make an appointment." That bracelet looks a bit like the popular ancient mellow gold nowadays. As Yang Hui shook it, the lotus-shaped bell hanging below also rang. The lotus seed was only the size of a thumb, and the crisp bell seemed to echo throughout the hallway. In the sound of ding-ling, I seemed to hear a man's displeased and cold snort. I was so scared that my heart was stirred up, and the sound of the bell made my eardrums ache. I quickly reached out to Yang Hui and said, "Don't make a fuss, put it away, leave it at the property management, and let them find someone to claim it. What kind of bell are you ringing at night?" But Yang Hui shook her bracelet and chuckled, "They named it for you, so why bother? Don't wear it for me. I'll go to the appointment on your behalf. This bracelet costs at least 20,000 to 30,000 yuan. Whether you're a human or a ghost, it's worth it to make an appointment." Before she could finish speaking, she suddenly screamed and turned her bracelet swaying hand towards me, saying, "What is this?" I saw a brightly colored ant lying on the back of her hand, the size of a grain of rice, with its upper jaw already piercing into her flesh. It was clearly painful and tightly pricked. Yang Hui shook her hand twice but couldn't shake it off. As she shook it, two more emerged from the lotus-shaped bell of the bracelet. She was so scared that she clenched the bracelet and stiffened the back of her hand, screaming at me, "Yin Miao, Yin Miao." Just as she screamed, I faintly heard a man's cold and hearty laughter. It's just very blurry, the sound insulation in the community is not good, and I don't know if I heard it wrong. I looked at the bracelet, as well as Yang Hui holding a paper bag that looked like a plaque, pinching her fingers to help her flick open the ants, and quickly put the bracelet away with a box, saying to Yang Hui, "It said that things of unknown origin cannot be touched. Those ants are quite poisonous." Yang Hui's hand back is already red and swollen, with a few blood stains showing through. She cried at me and said, "It was written for you, I only saw it. It's not your fault." I let out a cold sigh of helplessness in my heart and had to pull Yang Hui into the room, but just as I opened the door, I vaguely heard the man's faint sigh. I was so scared that I quickly pulled Yang Hui inside, casually put the paper bag in the shoe cabinet, and then found some cool oil to wipe the area where she was bitten by ants. Yang Hui has a delicate temperament and keeps blaming me, saying that she shouldn't share the apartment with me. I promised to make 2 dishes that she liked, so she stopped nagging me. After finishing her meal, she kept scratching the back of her hand, saying it was itchy, and then started blaming me again. Before, she always used to excuse the pain and didn't want to share the hygiene of the house, and I didn't care either. How uncomfortable it can be for ants to take a few bites. Alone washing dishes, tidying up the kitchen, collecting clothes, and mopping the floor, Yang Hui seemed to have already fallen asleep. I don't want to touch that paper bag either. I just want to give the bracelet to the property management tomorrow when I go to work and have them check who put it on the surveillance screen. But at night, I always vaguely hear the bells ringing, and the tinkling of the bells makes it difficult for me to sleep. In a daze, I could always hear a man's voice whispering in my ear, "Yin Miao, it's good to be back. Back." In my hometown, it is said that whistling and ringing bells are not allowed at night. The only way to ring bells is to summon ghosts or do a dojo at night. But the sound of the bell was too clear, and I couldn't quite distinguish it from my dream or something. As I was puzzled, I heard the man call me, "Yin Miao, wake up. Follow my body and I'll wake up." I was so scared that I quickly turned on the light and grabbed an unknown jade Buddha from the bedside table, only to hear the sound of ding-ling-ling coming from outside. Yang Hui is a bit greedy for small gains, and I'm afraid she'll go get that bracelet again. Holding the jade Buddha, I opened the door and glanced at it. In the evening, the living room was not lit either. Yang Hui, with her hair disheveled and wearing pajamas, was wearing the auspicious cloud lotus-shaped bell bracelet in her hand, shining with gold and the street light shining through the window. She held up her hand, the bracelet draped over her bowl, swaying in a strange rhythm, and the bells rang rhythmically as she shook them. As I walked, I was reciting, "I'm back, I'm back. Yin Miao, I'm back." Her voice was the same as the tone of those neighbors in the community who said, "back," when they saw me. It was dull and empty, as if they were summoning souls in the middle of the night. End of this chapter. Chapter 2. Black Cat Laugh. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2. Black Cat Laugh. I saw Yang Hui swaying her bracelet in the living room like she was sleepwalking, which scared me so much that I didn't know what to do. Yang Hui wasn't just walking around recklessly. The wrist with a bracelet was swinging back and forth, circling around the coffee table in the living room, circling one after another. There was still a paper bag with my name written on it on the coffee table, standing straight there, just like my plaque. This looks like a Taoist holding a soul-summoning bell and winding around the coffin. I just felt a chill in my heart and hair. I tried calling her a few words, but she didn't react either. But he still raised his hand and shook the bracelet on his wrist, revealing a face slowly from his loose hair. He grinned at me and said, "Yunmiao, it's good to be back. She will be quite close to me now." The area on the back of her hand where the ant bit her has become swollen and transparent, as if there is a bag of blood under her skin, and with just a poke, blood will seep out. I tried to extend the jade Buddha in my hand towards her, but Yang Hui shook the bracelet on her wrist and started circling around the white paper bag with my name written on it. This is really terrifying. I turned around and was about to get my phone to make a phone call when I heard the man's voice say softly, "The jade Buddha fixed her forehead." The sound this time was incredibly clear, but it seemed like it was coming from somewhere unknown. I held the jade Buddha and looked left and right. I had no choice but to turn a dead horse into a living horse doctor. Just as Yang Hui turned around, I pinched the jade Buddha and pressed her forehead. The jade Buddha had been in my hand for a long time and was already warm, but Yang Hui screamed and jumped up as if she had poured a basin of cold water on her body in an instant. As she danced, the sound of the bells on the bracelet also became chaotic. The curtains in the living room seemed to be swept up by a gust of wind, making a rustling sound, as if there was a faint voice shouting, "Bell" or something. When I was blown by the wind, I only felt a chill in my body, but Yang Hui suddenly shuddered and collapsed. That night, I called an ambulance and took Yang Hui to the hospital. When the nurse was treating the wound on the way, she asked me to remove the bracelet, but her arm was swollen and couldn't be removed. The nurse had to push the bracelet up and, to be honest, had no choice but to ask the firefighter to cut it off. I received emergency treatment in the hospital and underwent a round of examinations. The doctor said it was bitten by poisonous fire ants, which are highly toxic and can cause high fever and shock. If I were to deliver it later, I might have died in my dream. I couldn't help but think of the male voice that woke me up from my sleep. I watched Yang Hui all night, afraid that something might happen to her. In the morning, when the nurse was checking the room, I got up in a hurry and fell to the ground unsteadily. Fortunately, it was in the hospital where the nurse helped me sit aside and gave me a bottle of glucose, saying that I looked like I had low blood sugar caused by anemia. I was just drinking the strange-tasting glucose without arguing. A few days ago when I started working, I did a health report and there was no anemia at all. However, the nurse focused on Yang Hui and didn't pay much attention to me. Yang Hui, who had been dribbling all night, not only failed to reduce swelling in her arms, but it actually became even bigger. The bracelet was stuck in her flesh, and she had a high fever that made her whole body sweat and soaked through. The nurse asked me to go home and get her 2 sets of clothes, and emphasized again that the fire department should cut off the bracelet, otherwise it would strangle the blood flow. I drank a bottle of glucose and felt more comfortable, and I am also preparing to go home. As I was leaving, the nurse registered her address and saw me writing Lingyun Community. She glanced at me curiously and said, "Do you live here?" "Yeah. Isn't this good?" I looked at her strangely. Lingyun Community is located near the city center and used to be the family area of a certain unit. Although it is a bit old, the rent is relatively cheap. The nurse just glanced at me, as if she was avoiding something, and turned around with the registration book before leaving. I was flustered in my heart, but remembering about Yang Hui, I couldn't keep asking and took a taxi home. I took leave for both her and me on the way, and we are still in the internship period. Both of us took leave, so naturally we couldn't miss a batch. When I entered the community, the people I met, whether they were going to work, buy groceries, or go to school, immediately stood up straight and walked straight to me with their legs bulging. They said to me in a faint voice, "You're back." I was so annoyed by them that I nodded and pretended to smile at them, and almost escaped all the way back home. At the doorstep, there was a long rectangular box placed vertically on the doorknob. It's the kind with a dark red background, still with auspicious cloud patterns on both sides, and even trimmed edges. The box was placed on the door handle, with one end facing me, and the words on it were still written with a brush. Yun Miao. But from the shape of that box, it looks like a small coffin with my name written on it. I just felt my head in a mess. I turned my head and saw a surveillance camera in the hallway. Grasping the box, he slammed it heavily onto the fire box in the hallway, opened the door, and when he turned around to enter, he let out 3 loud boos at the door. Learning from the method my grandmother taught me before, I bravely stomped my feet and cursed, "Chop your head and chop it to death. If you want to die, stay away from me." After cursing, he slammed the door heavily. I don't know why, but just as the door closed, I vaguely heard a man's low laughter. I was so scared that I quickly turned around, only to see the paper bag with my name written on it standing straight on the coffee table in the living room last night. I am another thriller. Quickly rushed into young Huey's room, tidied up a few of her clothes, grabbed the paper bag, and walked out. I don't know if I didn't have breakfast, I always feel a bit dizzy. Just as I was about to open the door, I heard the man's voice say helplessly, "Don't come back again." I was stunned for a moment as I listened. Why is this contradictory? However, after taking a glance at the paper bag in my hand, I opened the door and prepared to go to the property management for surveillance to clarify this matter and see who was responsible for these chi things. But just as I opened the door, I saw 2 bowls of rice placed at the door, filled with incense. In the middle of that rice bowl, there was the box that I had just transferred to the fire box. Just this time, the end of the box with the name written on it didn't face me anymore, but followed the door. This looks like a small and rudimentary spiritual hall. I can hardly even step out of the door, so I carefully squeezed out from the next door frame. I don't even care about those things, just go to the property management and let them come and see what these are. But just as I was turning the stairs, I suddenly heard a cat meow. Turning his head, he saw a pitch-black cat lying on the fire hose, with its head down, holding its dark green eyes towards me. As I turned around, the black cat grinned but didn't make a sound. Instead, it seemed to show me a sinister smile. Just as the cat grinned, it stared at my back and seemed to see something. It screamed, its body seemed unstable, its limbs clattering on the fire pipe, and the rusty red paint was falling off in chunks. But it still didn't stabilize, and the cat fell with a snap. I saw my pupils shrink, instinctively retreating, afraid that the cat would fall and pounce on me. Cats have 9 lives, and their bodies are soft. If they fall from such a high height, nothing will happen. Strangely, when this black cat landed, it was like a watermelon that had been thrown off. With a pop sound, there was not even a scream, and a dark red blood gushed out of its body, instantly wetting its shiny black fur. But it still struggled to stand up, with blood on its limbs and a strange growl from its throat towards me. And with the bright red blood gushing out from under the black cat, something warm seemed to be surging out of my nose too. At that moment, the male voice reappeared and said, "Let's go." End of this chapter. Chapter 3. Paperman Festival. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3 Paperman Festival. Seeing that the black cat was bleeding profusely when it fell and even stood up limping, I felt a chill in my back. I casually wiped my itchy nose with the back of my hand and hurriedly ran downstairs with something. The wind whistled in my ears, and I faintly heard the sound of bells and the faint scent of incense. That black cat seems to be in the hallway, screaming in agony. I ran very fast, ran downstairs in one breath, and arrived at a place outside where the sun was shining. It only took me a moment to slow down, but I found that the back of my hand was covered in blood and there were thick drops of blood falling to the ground. I touched it with my back and didn't know why I had nosebleeds. There seemed to be something staring at me from the back all along, not even daring to turn my head back. I pulled some paper, stuffed my nostrils, slapped the back of my neck twice, and ran straight to the property management. Wait for me to leave the white bag with my name written on it at the property management, have them adjust the surveillance, and then send someone to the door of my room to look at those things. The property management lady saw me with blood on my face. Although she was a bit scared, she still had a lively expression on her face, urging me to be kind to others and handle neighborhood relationships well. This means that I will only be retaliated for offending someone. However, at my strong request, he still took me to the door to see. I heard that a black cat had fallen and died, and he deliberately called for security. Only when there are many people can I dare to walk home again. When we go back, starting from downstairs, the ground is covered with my nosebleeds, and drops of fresh blood drip onto the ground, like a guide. When it arrived at the entrance of the hallway, the black cat was gone, and the blood that had originally flowed on the ground was also gone. However, the red paint that had been scratched and fallen from the fire pipe was scattered all over the ground. What's even more strange is that even though I started nosebleeds at the entrance of the hallway, the drops of blood extended all the way to my doorstep. But at my doorstep, the box with my name written on it like a small coffin, and the rudimentary little funeral hall with my rice bowl and incense are also missing. I wandered around the door in confusion, not even leaving any incense ash, but the drops of blood were very bloody and glaring. But I didn't drop nosebleeds at the door. Just as I was about to open the door and take a look, the property management just looked at me coldly and said, maybe I didn't sleep well, or maybe I had a lot of nosebleeds and hallucinations. Young girls like you who just entered society always have delusions of being victimized. It's been so many years now, and there are still a few people who know about these old-fashioned feudal superstitions. But I still feel this is strange, coupled with the strange expressions of those neighbors. I don't want to pay attention to the strange energy of the property management lady. He said directly, can you help me settle the water and electricity bills? I'll go to the hospital and settle my roommate, and then come back to rent out. This place is so strange. If it weren't for the male voice who didn't know if it was a human or a ghost waking me up last night and making Yang Hui sway like this all night, I would probably have gone from shock to death. What if it were me trying on that bracelet? I was killed last night, right? Even if it's cheap, I don't have the courage to live here anymore. No matter what the property management says, the deposit can't be refunded anymore. It's urgent to leave here. But just as I turned the hallway, I heard some noise from the fire pipes on the floor. And something fell off, like fragments, from my head to my shoulders. I quickly took 2 steps forward and reached out to pat the fragments on my shoulder, which were clearly the peeling red paint on the fire pipes. On one side was a bright red thin skin, and on the other side was rust stains. They landed on the back of my hand one by one, perfectly fitting against those nosebleeds, as if red paint was dry blood. As soon as it landed on the back of my hand, it fused with my nosebleeds. Looking up at the fire pipe, there was nothing scratching on it, and I don't know why the paint fell off so badly. I was watching as the property management caught up with me in a bad mood. Seeing me still standing at the entrance of the hallway, they probably thought I regretted it and said to me with a smile, "Little sister, our community is really the cheapest nearby." She happened to be standing under the fire pipe, with patches of red paint scattered on her head from time to time. As she spoke, she waved her hand and flicked her hair, casually removing these scattered paint fragments. He said to me, "You've just entered society and it's not easy to work. Don't waste your deposit." She felt the red paint rust flakes falling more and more, sighing, "Fire pipes, we will renovate and repaint them this year. You can think about it yourself," she said as she reached out and brushed her bangs, but just as she released her hand, there was a strand of blood between her fingers. The property management was also startled. They stood in the same place, flicked their fingers, then turned to touch their head and slowly lifted it upwards. Just as she looked up, a black shadow, mixed with blood and rust, slammed down on her face. I vaguely heard the man's soft sigh again, followed by the screams and jumps of the property management. The black cat, whether dead or alive, landed on the face of the property manager and with a blood clip, slid to the ground, but its eyes remained fixed on me with a heavy gaze. I don't know if it's because of the ground twitching or something, but my body is still wriggling. Cats' eyes are inherently peculiar. Legend has it that cats' eyes are evil spirits, and being watched by a cat in the middle of the night can captivate one's soul. I couldn't help but take 2 steps back, but forgot that I had already stood on the edge of the stairs to avoid the red paint that had fallen off the fire pipe. As I stepped back, my head felt dizzy, and my heel stepped on it, causing my body to suddenly fall down. At that moment, it seemed like the black cat suddenly stood up again, stepping on blood and rushing towards me. I screamed in fear, and then I felt a tightness in my waist. One hand supported my waist and pushed me towards the handrail of the stairs next to me. My survival instinct led me to grab the escalator and quickly turn my head, only to find a pale and handsome face half floating under the handrail, with one hand half wrapped around my waist. Seeing me staring at him, a sad expression flashed on his face. He shook his head at me and whispered, "Hurry up, don't come back." Following him, he slowly sank down the hollow in the middle of the stairs and disappeared. There seems to be a faint smoke floating in the middle of the stairs, with a smell of burning paper. I lay on the armrest, looking down at the face disappearing like smoke, feeling my heart stopping. This voice is the one that wakes me up in the middle of the night and calls me to hurry. What the hell is going on? However, thinking of the dead cat that was still rushing towards me, I quickly turned my head and saw that the property management was covered in blood. With a righteous and angry kick, I kicked the black cat away, wiped my face with a tissue, shouted angrily at the security guard, and strode down. She was stepping on blood under her feet. The hallway in this community has been without anti-slip measures for many years, and she walked quickly, so she immediately slipped down the stairs. I wanted to reach out and give her a hand, but the armrest seemed to shake a bit, which scared me. I quickly loosened the armrest and ran up 2 steps. But then came a scream from the property management. As she slid down, one of her legs got stuck inside the old armrest. The handrails in this old community are all welded with small steel bars, and some of the welding points have rusted off. When the property management kicked them over, the rusted steel bars just penetrated her legs. The bright red blood slid over the rusty little steel bars, resembling the peeling red paint. Just now the sharp and joyful cry cut through the entire corridor, and I vaguely heard the mournful scream of the cat. The leg where the property was penetrated by steel bars was the one where she kicked the cat corpse. If it weren't for that man helping me just now and I fell, I'm afraid it would be the same, right? The security guard wanted to hold on to the property manager and prevent her from falling down again, shouting at me, "Go downstairs and ask someone to come up and help." I just woke up from the shock and quickly went downstairs to ask for help, and then called for an ambulance. But just as I ran out of the hallway, I smelled the strong smell of burning paper. I saw an old lady with silver hair holding a basin burning paper under the hallway, reciting something while burning. Even throwing folded paper figures into the fire. She seemed to feel me looking at her, burning paper and saying to me, "You're back, you're back. Don't leave when you're back." Her tone was like that of an elderly person who had seen a child who had only returned home for a long time, with a heavy heart, but I didn't know her. The eerie voice, reflecting the flames of burning paper, appeared incredibly eerie in the narrow corridor. The paper figure she was holding in her hand resembled the white paper bag containing bracelets. And as I watched the flickering flames rising from the brazier, I felt waves of nausea in my stomach. The paper stuffed in my nose seemed to have been soaked through with blood, and it fell directly, with large drops of blood falling towards me. I quickly took out another piece of paper and stuffed it into my nostrils, which were bleeding incessantly. The old lady stared at me with dim and unclear eyes under the firelight, and kept saying softly, "Don't leave when you come back." Even standing in the sun, she only felt cold all over. At this moment, the emergency phone was connected, and I quickly picked up the phone to tell the location over there. But as soon as she turned her head, she saw the old lady with white hair picking up another paper figure and throwing it into the fire. I caught a glimpse of 2 words written on the back of the paper figure. Yun Miao. End of this chapter. Chapter 4. Financial Enthusiasm. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4. Financial enthusiasm. My life is short of water, so my grandmother gave me the word, meow. There are not many people with the surname Yun now, and I don't think there are many people named Yun Miao, so the possibility of having the same name is very low. I saw the old lady throw paper figures with the names Yun Miao into the brazier, and the facial features painted by the figures were gradually burned away by the fire, with smoke filling the air. I want to rush over and ask the old lady, is she behind the scenes at my doorstep? I heard the security guard extend their head out of the hallway window and shout at me, "Have you found anyone?" I instinctively looked up at the security guard, and when I turned back, I saw only one brazier in the hallway, and the old lady was nowhere to be found. But there is no door below the corridor, and I stood at the entrance without seeing her come out. Where can she go? But the security guard was shouting upstairs, so I had to quickly give our address to the ambulance on the other end of the phone and quickly find someone. In the old community, there weren't many residents, and the security couldn't hold on to the property management lady. I had to run to the property management again to find someone to help. By the time I called someone over, the black cat had already stiffened in the corner, even bleeding. I don't know why, I always feel an itch in my nose. The paper with my nose stuffed seems to be soaking wet again, so I changed it to cover my nostrils and then slapped my hollow palm twice against the back of my neck. When the property management lady was taken off the steel bars and carried downstairs, she still screamed in pain, "That dead cat, I want to chop it." I looked at the body of the black cat, and I always felt the sound of cats barking in the dilapidated and dim hallway. The old fire pipes seemed to be still instigating the falling of red paint rust. The property management came in full swing, and the security guard directly took the body of the black cat away. I still remember Yang Hui from the hospital, but I didn't dare to stay. I haphazardly treated my continuously bleeding nose and took a taxi over. It was also fortunate that as soon as I left the entrance of the community, a taxi stopped in front of me before I could place an order using my phone. I took a look at the nearby house in the car and found that Lingyan community doesn't dare to live anymore. By the way, I called my colleagues at the company to ask if there were any suitable house introductions and asked them to help me keep an eye on them. The price of staying in a hotel is too high, it's okay for 1 or 2 days. If it's too long, I can't afford it. As I got off the car and scanned the payment code with my phone, the driver held the sign of the payment code and said to me in a faint voice, "When will you go back? I'll pick you up. Don't come out again when you go back." I only feel that the phone I am holding is cold as I look up at the driver. His face was filled with empty and wooden expressions, and he even grinned at me. With a beep from the phone, the payment code was scanned and the driver seemed to suddenly wake up and turn his head away. I dare not make the payment in the car anymore, so I quickly pushed the car door and got off. As he stood by the roadside and lowered his head to make the payment, the driver suddenly extended his head from the front passenger seat with a hollow and wooden expression. "Go back early. Just go back, don't come out again." I was so scared that my soul flew. Holding my phone and carrying Yang Hui's clothes, I walked towards the hospital. I only felt relieved when I encountered an abortion in the hospital. But he still lowered his head and paid the fare. It's just strange that the driver's WeChat avatar actually has a black cat face, and it's so black that only amber-colored pupils and half-exposed sharp teeth can be seen. My eyes hardly dared to float upwards, and my fingers quickly entered the amount before turning off my phone. Just by the time I arrived at the hospital room, Yang Hui, who had been in shock and unconscious, had already woken up, and her hands seemed to have lost a lot of swelling. I saw her like this and quickly said to her, "Please try to see if the bracelet can be taken out first." "This is mine now." Yang Hui looked up at me, her fingers still pointing at the lotus-shaped bell on the bracelet, and chuckled, "I've seen it, there are no ants inside." She said, with her eyes raised and staring at me, "Yun Miao, I was bitten unconscious by ants because of this bracelet. It can be said that I helped you block the disaster. You wouldn't want a bracelet with an unknown origin, would you? You're not dying anymore." When I saw Yang Hui like that, I knew she was greedy again. I quickly said to her, "It's this bracelet that almost killed you." How dare you still want it? Didn't you realize that this thing is very strange? Now it's a rule of law society, there's nothing strange like what you said. Yang Hui shook her bracelet, pulled on the blanket, and said in a muffled voice, I don't care, this bracelet belongs to me anyway. I asked the nurse, and once I have another blood test, I will be discharged from the hospital. She was clearly swaying the bell inside the blanket, with a tinkling sound that seemed to make me feel dizzy and painful. Yang Hui said in a muffled tone, isn't it just someone you have a crush on? What's the big deal? I'm not inferior to you either. If not, I'll make an appointment for you. She even pulled back the blanket and giggled at me, half-truthfully saying, you said you didn't want it. Whether it's a person or a ghost, it's mine. You can't regret it. When she spoke, she was still waving the dangling bell with her fingers out, clearly unable to put it down. Yang Hui. I suddenly felt like she was obsessed with something, doing it for a bracelet like this. Or rather, she wasn't just interested in this bracelet, but the person who gave it away. After all, it's such a valuable thing when it comes to making a move, it must be rich and powerful. Yang Hui has always wanted to marry a wealthy person. But Yang Hugin didn't listen to my advice. The person who was supposed to moan and haw for a long time after being bitten by a mosquito didn't want me to accompany him either. He wanted to go and have his blood drawn alone. I told her to stay in the hospital for one night, and we will be discharged once I find a house. Even more so, I told her what happened afterwards, and she still had a skeptical expression, thinking that I didn't want her to come across the person who gave the bracelet. I said I don't want it myself and still refused to give it to her. I couldn't resist even trying to persuade them, and in the end, the two of them had a fight. I don't know why, but in a moment of anger, my nose, which had finally stopped bleeding, started to bleed again. This time it's not just a drop by drop, it's like flowing water. I only saw 2 streams of blood flowing down in front of me, followed by the scream of Yang Hui, and then I fainted. When she woke up again, it was already afternoon. Yang Hui sat playing with her phone and occasionally poked the bell on the gold bracelet. He said angrily to me, I'm a patient, I'm not unconscious, but you are. I asked the nurse to draw blood for you to test, and the results will not be available until tomorrow afternoon. They will call you then, you can come and get the results yourself. Since you're awake, let's go back. As soon as she said she would go back, she excitedly shook the bracelet on her wrist, packed her luggage, and forced herself to go back. That bracelet, even more so, refuses to be removed. He turned his head to look at me and said, Yunmiao, when you looked at the house, you had your eye on Lingyun community. Besides being cheap, it wasn't because the name had a cloud character. Don't think I don't know. Now you're saying you don't rent or not, and I've paid half of the deposit and rent. Can you give it to me? She left with her things in hand, and I paid for all the medical expenses. I didn't originally want to go back with her, but I had to pay for my medical expenses and couldn't afford to stay at the hotel for a night. I didn't bring any clothes to change, and I kept running nosebleeds. My head was really dizzy. I had to keep my head down and follow up, thinking about taking a look first. If there's nothing wrong, at night, I'll wear the jade Buddha close to my body. At most, Yang Hui and I can sleep in the same bed for some care. If there's anything strange, I'll just pack up a few clothes and shamelessly ask a colleague for help overnight. As for Yang Hui, I can't resist it, just leave her alone. The person taking the taxi this time is Yang Hui, who is still gambling and throwing things in the back seat doesn't give me any place to sit. I had to take the passenger seat and told the driver about the Lingyun community. The old driver seemed a bit surprised and glanced at us, but followed us calmly. This reminds me of the expression on the nurse's face when she asked me about living in Lingyun community. Generally, nurses and drivers are locals, and they may have some knowledge about Lingyun community. I want to ask the driver, but the hospital road is full of cars coming and going, and the driver is fully focused on driving, so it's not easy to ask. I had to lean against my seat, thinking that if I couldn't persuade Yang Hui again, I would move out on my own. I didn't sleep well and lost blood again. The car swayed and I fell asleep in a daze. I vaguely seemed to see that handsome face again, and this time he was right next to me, whispering to me, "Don't go back. If you go back again, it won't let you leave. Yunmiao, don't go back." End of this chapter. Chapter 5. Attractive Returns. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5 Attractive Returns. I fell asleep in the car and saw that handsome face saying, "Don't go back," to me. In an instant, I woke up again. The car had already arrived outside the Lingyun community, and Yang Hui said to the driver, "Drive in from there and stop at the bottom of building 4. I don't know if she was intentionally showing off, or if she habitually lifted her right hand. The gold bracelet on her wrist shook twice, and the bell rang again, causing waves of pain in my brain. Stop. I thought of the recent strange incident and the handsome man's reminder earlier, and quickly said to the driver, "We'll get off here." The driver looked at me and Yang Hui for a moment, with a face that didn't know who to listen to, but he still stepped on the brake. I turned my head to look at Yang Hui and said with utmost seriousness, "Tonight we'll stay overnight at the internet cafe. Tomorrow during the day, let the property management go pack our luggage together. You can get off the car with me, don't go back. Yunmiao, don't be crazy." Yang Hui snorted coldly and reached out to touch her bracelet. "If you don't live in a house, why bother going to an internet cafe for a night? I just left the hospital, who would be willing to go with you to that filthy and broken internet cafe? I'm not afraid of shadows tilting, so go if you like. I want to go back and sleep in my bed anyway. If you don't want it, don't others want it?" Her finger ran over the bracelet, clearly referring to the bracelet and the person who gave it. Seeing her stubbornly pushing the car door to get off, she heard Yang Huiling snort, "Give me the fare." I couldn't help but sneer as I paid for her medical expenses with my phone and card. I glanced at the billing meter and handed out cash to the driver. The old driver glanced at me, then at the gate of Lingyun community, and turned his head to say something to Yang Hui. "What are you looking at? Drive. I'll pay you for the price difference later." Yang Hui yelled at the driver in frustration. Lao Ciji glanced at me, sighed, turned the steering wheel and entered the gate of Lingyun community. I carried something and hung the jade Buddha in my pocket around my neck, pulling my collar and wearing it close to my body. Watching the taxi turn in, I don't know if it's an illusion. The wheels of the car are grinding on the ground, as if there are black marks on them. However, the jade Buddha was too cold. As soon as it touched my chest, it made me shiver. This jade Buddha was asked for by my grandmother from the Taoist temple. She said she had been enlightened and even said, "Men wear guanyin and women wear Buddha." She specially chose a jade Buddha for me. When she brought it back, she wore a plastic red rope, which looked like a street vendor used to deceive the elderly. Which Taoist temple would sell jade Buddha? It's just her kindness. Although I haven't worn it for so many years, I have always carried it with me. I pressed the jade Buddha, and then I installed dim sum. I spent 15 yuan to wrap up the night in a nearby internet cafe. This is the kind of internet cafe in an old community, very old. It costs 4 yuan per hour and 15 yuan per night. It's crowded and lively. I don't have money now, I just want to get through tonight, pick up my luggage tomorrow, borrow from my colleagues, and find a new house. This type of internet cafe not only has the smell of smoke and instant noodles, but also the smell of stinky feet and some indistinguishable odors. When I went to look for a machine, I saw several computer interfaces displaying inappropriate images for children. Sleeping is definitely not easy to sleep. I first browsed several movie viewing websites and made an appointment with 2 of the cheapest ones for tomorrow's noon viewing. I planned to watch a movie and stay up all night. But in the middle of the night, my nose began to itch again, and my nosebleeds dripped onto the keyboard. I went to the bathroom to wash my face and patted the back of my neck with cold water, forcefully blocking it with paper. I don't know what's going on in the past few days. I've been having nosebleeds and feeling a bit dizzy. I always feel like things are a bit strange. But without much thought, he returned to his seat and watched the movie in a daze. The internet cafe was still bustling with people, but by early morning, it had become quiet. I can't bear it anymore. I don't even know what I'm looking at when I look at the screen. Looking at it in a daze, the internet speed seemed to slow down for a moment. When the screen was loaded, it switched to a hallway entrance. The originally colorful movie footage has been cut into a surveillance black and white image, which is also somewhat familiar. The door facing the room was wide open, with that ancient-style couplet hanging on it. Because it was a black and white picture, it was unclear whether it was red or white. But the fabric was a bit strange, as if there was still something that hadn't dried completely, and it flowed down the fabric one by one. I glanced at the display on the computer screen, which was not the movie I had originally opened. I moved my mouse in confusion, intending to turn it off. But just as I moved the mouse, I saw a person wearing white pajamas, with a disheveled head, walking out of the door. The person seemed to have a clothesline hanging around their neck, swaying with their dangling hands. A bracelet swayed on one wrist, with 3 thin objects gently swaying on it. Although the surveillance footage did not capture the front face, the lotus-shaped bracelet was definitely the one worn by Yang Hui. I quickly leaned over to the screen to take a look, and only then did I realize that the entrance to the building and the wide-open door were the same house that Yang Hui and I rented. And in the middle of the wide-open door of the house, there seemed to be something placed, with incense inserted, and 3 flickering flames faintly. After Yang Hui walked out of the door, she clearly knew the direction of the surveillance cameras. She even lifted her hand with a gold bracelet, lifted her hair, grinned, and showed her gums, giving a strange smile. She silently and slowly said 2 words. Yun. Meow. Although there was no sound, it was clear from her mouth shape that it was my name. After she finished speaking, she took off the hanging clothesline from her neck and threw it towards the fire pipe in the hallway. She didn't pull up the chair, but used her hands and feet together. She was wearing a nightgown and trembling as she climbed up the rusty handrail of the stairs, standing still. Then, she tied a knot on the clothes-hanging rope on the red paint-peeling fire pipe. I poked my head inside and stepped barefoot on the stairs, almost twisting my waist. I turned my head towards the surveillance camera and slowly slipped my neck in. Then he leaned forward and fell off the rusty armrest. The white shadow flickered on the screen, and the induction light in the hallway seemed to go out. Only the window in the hallway emitted dim light, and Yang Hui's figure hung under the fire pipe, swaying left and right. On the back of the hanging right hand, the bell of the bracelet kept shaking. I just felt like my throat was being pinched tightly covering my mouth and unable to make any sound. In the end, for some reason, I forcefully pushed the keyboard holder in front of me. The worn-out keyboard jumped up from inside, and the foot-picking guy next to him yelled loudly, "Damn it." I stared at the picture, panting heavily. The big brother turned his head to take a look, and just as he did, the swaying figure hanging on the fire pipe on the screen shook and disappeared, then cut into a movie. Problem. The big brother glanced at me and pushed the keyboard towards me in frustration, then left to play games on his own. I stared at the movie footage jumping on the screen, feeling cold all over. The tissue with my nose stuffed seemed to be soaked in blood, so I pulled it out and randomly stuffed a piece of paper into it. The big brother next to me gave a somewhat disdainful glance at the bloody tissue I threw out, and without hesitation cursed, "Bad luck." I just shook my hands and called Yang Hui, but no matter how I tried to call, when the phone got through, no one answered. I pinched myself hard, the pain was very obvious, and I don't know if the scene just now was true or false. But I have seen the strangeness of Yang Hui wearing that bracelet that night and the black cat. I don't know why the surveillance footage in the hallway was transmitted to the computer in the internet cafe. Those scenes happened to reach me, maybe they were the ones that led me back. But I dare not bet, what if it's true? Didn't Yang Hui just die like that? End of this chapter. Chapter 6. Death by Name. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6. Death by Name. I held my phone and called Yang Hui for a while, but she never answered. The last bit of mental entanglement was dispelled by the repeated beeps on the phone. I changed my nose with a tissue stuffed in it, didn't dare to delay, so I gritted my teeth and dialed the police number as I walked outside. Just say my roommate is going to commit suicide, give them the exact address, and then ask the police to go quickly. I also strode towards Lingyun community, and although Yang Hui was greedy for small gains, she didn't end up dying. As long as I report to the police, even if there is something strange inside, I will go back and have an accident. The police will come quickly, but they cannot save me and Yang Hui. Just thinking this, I was sweating profusely. After making up my mind, I quickly ran out of the internet cafe. There were no pedestrians on the road in the early morning, only cold winds blowing. I ran all the way to Lingyun community, where there were no security guards. But as I was climbing the stairs, my arm tightened and one hand grabbed my waist, pushing me out of the hallway. I was so scared that I almost screamed and grabbed my phone as I threw it towards the direction where my arm was stretched out. But my hand was held, and into my eyes was the handsome face that helped me on the stairs during the day. It will be early in the morning, and that face is no longer as ethereal as smoke during the day. It is very clear, and it appears more and more like a crown of jade, with eyebrows and eyes like stars. The corners of a pair of red phoenix eyes are slightly raised. Lips lightly pursed, but there was no trace of blood. During the day, my figure was ethereal and faint, flashing by, but I didn't see it too clearly. Upon closer inspection, his attire seemed to be ancient attire, with a jade crown and ink hair tied around his head. He was wearing a moonlight white brocade robe, making him appear more and more like a person in ink painting. "Don't go up," he said in a low hum with a hint of helplessness as he gently shook his chin towards me like a knife carving an axe chiseling. He seemed afraid of me going up, so he blocked the entrance of the corridor and said, "It deliberately lured you back." "Who is it?" I thought of the eerie black cat during the day and stared at him. "Who are you?" Just as I was asking, there seemed to be a gurgling sound from upstairs as the rope was about to be tightened, as well as the jingling of the golden bracelet bells, and Yang Hui's painful and intermittent cries. "Yunmiao, help me." The house in Lingyun community is very old, with only 5 floors. We live on the 4th floor because the 1st floor is not the current type of elevated floor and the floor is very low, so the sound of the 4th floor can be completely heard from below. As soon as I heard Yang Hui's voice upstairs, my heart immediately tightened. Regardless of the man's obstruction, I raised my foot and wanted to rush towards the hallway. I thought he would avoid it, but I didn't expect to bump into him. He didn't move, and I bumped into him. He even hugged me tightly in his arms and said, "Yunmiao, don't go. Yang Hui is going to die." I pushed him and said in a deep voice, "I don't care what it is to lead me back, but life is at stake. I have already reported it to the police. Please save someone first. She's already dead." When she put on the bracelet, she was already dead. The man hugged me tightly and said in a deep voice, "She shouldn't have been greedy for that bracelet. She died by name, she died on your behalf. If you go up now, she'll die for nothing. To die under one's name." I suddenly looked up at the man and opened my eyes wide, saying, "What does it mean to die for me? Why do I have to die? You're also about to die, Yunmiao." The man's face flashed with a hint of injury like ink. But at this moment, there seemed to be a creaking sound coming from upstairs, followed by something shaking outside the corridor window. I quickly looked up and saw a pair of rusty bare feet swaying outwards from time to time in the gap between the iron bars of the window under the moonlight. Amidst the creaking sound of the rope being pulled, there was also a painful sob from Yang Hui. "Yunmiao, help me. Help me." This time the voice was incredibly clear, as if it was right beside me. Amidst the sound of the bells, there seemed to be a low whimper from the cat, making it even more eerie and eerie. I looked up at Yang Hui's feet in the iron fence and looked up at the man. What the hell is going on? Yunmiao, go home. The man's slender Danfeng's eyes flashed with a hint of injury, and he reached out through his clothes to point at the jade Buddha on my chest. Don't come here again in the future. If you stay here again, even if she dies in your name, you won't be able to endure it. What else did I want to ask, but the car lights flashed in the distance. The light shone over the man's figure, penetrating directly, and his figure also faded. But he still said to me, don't go up. Just as he finished speaking, the car headlights came straight in front of me. Two people in police uniforms hurriedly got out of the car and said to me, did you call the police? I quickly nodded and pointed upstairs. It's on the 4th floor. The two police officers did not delay, holding flashlights and climbing up 2 or 3 stairs at a time. I stood at the entrance of the hallway, hesitating whether to go up or not, but the young police officer who was lagging behind waved a flashlight at me, gesturing for me to follow. I gritted my teeth, but I still took big steps to follow. Just as I ran to the entrance of the 4th floor hallway, I heard the police officer at the beginning exclaim in surprise and quickly turn his head and say, don't look. It was already late. Just as the flashlight flashed by, I saw Yang Hui in a nightgown hanging on the fire pipe, just like what I saw in an internet cafe earlier. But strangely, I watched as she was clearly hanging, but her nightgown was stained with blood. Blood flowed down her neck, wetting her nightgown from inside out. I stared at the nightgown but felt inexplicably familiar. The clothesline had already tightened around her neck, and the open wound could be clearly seen. Strangely, her face seemed to be holding her breath, covered in nail-sized bruises. Normally, no one moved her, so she hung like this and shouldn't have moved, but she still swayed back and forth. And the amplitude is very large. Barefoot stained with blood swaying in front of me, I nervously glanced at her right wrist, only to find that the gold bracelet was missing. The leading police officer dared not move any further and asked us to stand still at the corner of the hallway. They called for someone to come over and instructed the young police officer who was with me to protect the scene. Yang Hui has already dripped a large amount of blood under her body. The young police officer shook his flashlight and let out a low voice, she seems to have words on her back. My heart is full of that golden bracelet. When I heard it had words, I instinctively looked up. At this moment, Yang Hui's body shook again, and the young police officer took a photo with his flashlight. I saw several words stained with bloody blood on the back of the nightgown soaked in blood. That blood seemed to seep out from behind, staining the nightgown, a bit uneven in depth. Cloud. Water. Water. The young police officer squinted his eyes and frowned. It doesn't seem like it was written. It was cut out on the back with a knife, and then stained with blood. The culprit is also too insane, writing on the back of a person. The old police officer gave him a glare, glanced at me, and signaled him not to speak in front of me. The young police officer seemed to have just remembered and quickly reached out to block me. Don't look, come with me and wait in the car below. Yunmiao, I looked up at him and whispered, the character on her back is Yunmiao, my name. And one more thing, the nightgown Yang Hui is wearing is not her own. It's mine. Is this what the man just said about dying by name? How did he know that Yang Hui died like this when he didn't come up? Or rather Yang Hui was killed by him. Grandma once said, ghosts are the best at deceiving people. End of this chapter. Chapter 7. Carrying Evil on the Body. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7. Carrying Evil on the Body. Yang Hui died strangely. From where she was hanging to the window at the corner of the hallway where we stood, there were also many drops of blood. The seasoned police officer took a distant look and confirmed Yang Hui's death. They were part of the police force and were not skilled in handling such matters. They were also afraid of damaging the scene, so they only took a glance and asked the young police officer to take me to the police car downstairs, where he was protecting the scene. But just as I turned around, Yang Hui swayed on the fire pipe, as if the rope couldn't bear it anymore, and there were 2 more giggles. The amplitude of her body swaying back and forth began to increase, and the wound's throat was choked by the rope, making a gurgling sound, as well as some slowly tearing sound. And inside the fire pipe, there was also a creaking sound due to the rope pulling. Even the seasoned police officer looked surprised and quickly took out his baton, giving the young man a warning. As Yang Hui's body swayed larger and larger, blood dripped more and more. Thick, crimson blood flowed through the blackened cement stairs, gradually flowing downwards. I watched as the blood turned into a red paint that was about to solidify. Many past scenes flashed before my eyes, and my stomach twitched as I turned around to run downstairs. The scene of a dead person, I don't want to watch it anymore. But just as I turned around, I heard a snap sound. The clothesline hanging Yang Hui's body seemed to be unbearable and snapped with just a flick. The nylon rope slipped through the wound on Yang Hui's neck, bouncing at both ends and splattering blood and water. Yang Hui's body plummeted down the stairs, but did not fall. Instead, it lay horizontally on the handrail of the stairs. Ah! The young police officer exclaimed in surprise and grabbed me. I only felt blood and water flickering in front of me, and then I saw Yang Hui's body lying limply on the handrail of the stairs. Her head was half broken due to her neck being strangled, and she twisted violently when she hit the handrail. Between the inverted black hair, a pair of bulging and congested eyes stared at me like the dead black cat during the day. Blood gushed out from her neck, dripping down with black hair. Because lying on the armrest, the back of the nightgown was close to the body, and the words, Yunmiao, drawn on the back blade became more and more clear. Yunmiao, hurry up. The man's voice came to me again and he said in a deep voice, go home. I stared at Yang Hui's body, panting heavily, and my mind began to rumble. At the dimly lit entrance of the hallway, the young police officer pulled me back, stretched out his arms to protect me, and kept saying to me, don't look, don't look. But he himself was so scared that his hands were trembling and his words were trembling. The seasoned police officer began to take out his phone and make phone calls, urging people over there to come quickly. Although there were only 3 of us, I seemed to see many people pointing and whispering to me. On the fire pipe, there seems to be some scratching sound and a low meow of cats. Vaguely, it was as if one could hear the man's sighs and the sound of the bell swaying lightly. I was completely groggy, just hiding behind the young police officer, tightly clutching the jade Buddha on my chest, and forcefully glanced over to stop looking at Yang Hui's congested and protruding eyes. How did I go downstairs from behind? I felt a bit confused, only feeling a police uniform covering my head, holding my shoulders with both hands, and carefully walking down with me. Until I sat in the police car, listening to a gentle female voice comforting me, I couldn't hear anything and my stomach was pumping hard. In front of me were the wide-open eyes of the black cat when it died, as well as the wound on Yang Hui's neck, the blood-stained pajamas, and the congested and protruding eyes. There are still many scenes of blood flowing. Finally, I pushed open the car door and lay on the edge of the weed-covered flower bed in the community, spitting earth shattering in the midst of the alarm. When I finished vomiting and looked up again, I found that in the entire community, except for the 4 fourth-floor corridors with flashing lights, there was not a single one with lights on. How can they sleep when the alarm rings so loudly? I didn't stay at the scene for too long because I called the police and it was my roommate who died. I was taken back to the police station to take notes. Just as the car was moving, the man's sighing voice was heard again. Since you know you can't save her, why do you still need to call the police? You know how troublesome it is to call the police. Didn't you call the police before? I hold the jade Buddha and try not to think about the past. But I thought I could save Yang Hui this time. After all, the gold bracelet she was wearing was not mine. When I arrived at the police station, I was very cooperative and handed in my ID card and phone. The police usually first investigate and then inquire. During the time I was waiting, the female police officer stayed with me, gently comforting me, and even made me a cup of hot cocoa to calm my nerves. You also asked me why I work alone in a place so far from home and without any relatives, and I didn't go to college here either. But I know that after they investigate, they won't be so gentle with me. Sure enough, when the results of the investigation came out, the policewoman flipped through my information. Every time she flipped through a page, she glanced at me. As she flipped down, her face became even more pale and solemn. I held the cup of hot cocoa, shook my hands and took a sip at her mouth, wanting to smile at her, but couldn't smile at all. The policewoman flipped through the information and whispered, since the second year of junior high school, you've been reporting to the police 3 times, and every time a classmate or roommate dies in front of you, and the situation is very tragic. So you changed to 3 schools in junior high school, 2 schools in high school, and dropped out before finishing college. Yes. I sipped hot cocoa, a sweet and mellow substance that seemed bitter and astringent in my mouth. I have never known who my parents are since I was young. They were raised by my grandmother. Grandma helps people make incense candles in the village, which means that whoever has a household chores, she helps light incense candles, burn paper, and toast in the funeral hall. The amount of money depends on the meaning of the person involved. But if we can retrieve the chicken, duck, fish, and meat that have been placed in the spiritual hall, and some people will give us the rice that has been offered as a sacrifice, so our days can be considered passable. The villagers sympathized with her, and it was not easy for her to raise children. Whenever someone had old children's clothes, they would give them to me, but my grandmother never wanted 2 pieces of clothing for each child. She said 1 piece was enough. I have been wearing 100 family clothes and eating 100 family meals since I was young. As long as I wear clothes, shoes, and socks, if I don't wear them anymore, my grandmother will burn them. But just when I was about to graduate at the age of 6, a child from the same village took a red scarf from me. She didn't want to wear it anymore in junior high school. She always threw it around and asked me for one. If she lost it and had a spare one, she wouldn't be scolded for asking her mother for money to buy it. I have been wearing that red scarf for many years, but it doesn't look too red after washing. It's a bit gray and old, so I didn't pay much attention and gave it to her. When I saw the red scarf again later, it was hanging on a crooked-necked tree in the back mountain. The red scarf was stained with blood, incredibly red, just like the red pajamas on Yang Hui today. End of this chapter. Chapter 8. Strange Spirit Hall. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 8. Strange Spirit Hall. The memories of the past come to mind and weigh me down, making me gasp for breath. These things are not what I am willing to do. Since then, my grandmother has told me to take care of my own things and not let others use them, especially close-fitting clothes. Because of this incident, I was sent to the neighboring town to study. Since then, I have tried my best not to get close to people. Yang Hui was an accident. After sharing the apartment with her, I tried to avoid these things as much as possible. I thought that the golden bracelet was not mine. She had already been bitten by fire ants and hospitalized, which was considered a way to avoid harm and should not have any more accidents. I didn't expect the policewoman looked at my profile and remained silent for a long time. I have experience with reporting to the police 3 times before, so when I make notes later, I will honestly explain everything I found earlier. How did you get to know Yang Hui? How did you rent to Lingyun community? Why did you go to an internet cafe to cover the night? How did you discover that she was going to commit suicide, and the disappearance of the golden bracelet and the recent strangeness of the house? The policewoman listened to me while taking notes with a slightly heavy expression on her face, which was no longer as gentle as before. A middle-aged police officer came in and handed me a few photos. He said in a deep voice, "If she committed suicide, how can she go back and use a blade to scratch your name on her back?" In that photo, it was later taken by Yang Hui lying on the handrail of the stairs. I shook my head and said, "I don't know. I was in an internet cafe at the time, so you can check the surveillance footage." Yang Hui was at home at the time, so you can check the surveillance footage of that hallway. The surveillance of the hallway. The middle-aged police officer sneered and handed me 2 more photos. So, what's going on? There is a pile of lifelike paper-tied dolls in the photo, one of which has my name written on its chest. The paper figure next to him, using ink to depict his facial features with just a few strokes, depicted his slightly raised phoenix-like eyes, sword-like eyebrows, lightly pursed thin lips, and a spirit reminiscent of a person in ink painting, creating an extremely legendary image. That doll also has a name written on it. Ling Yuan. 2 dolls are holding a red thread, resembling the colorful silk that ancient people used to worship heaven and earth. Although it's just a photo, it makes my heart tremble when I see it. So, the voice that keeps reminding me is Ling Yuan's. Ling Yuan, Yinmiao, Ling Yun community. He said Yang Hui died on my behalf, I believe. But why was he painted on the wedding paper with me attached? Who is Ling Yuan? I don't know. The middle-aged police officer tapped on the photo and whispered to me, this doll is the custom of getting married here, which is the dowry given by the man to the woman. A pair symbolizes eternal unity, don't you know? I'm staring at that photo, dowry. So that bracelet was also a dowry for me. Yang Hui took the bracelet, that's why she died. Yun Miao. The middle-aged police officer patted the table and pushed the stack of documents towards me. You've seen 2 classmates die unexpectedly, and 1 classmate jumps off a building in front of you. You always report to the police, but in the end, it's not an accident, it's just that we found a connection that's inseparable from you, but it's not directly related to you. Haven't you ever thought about why things like this always happen around you? He said in a deep voice. His voice was not blaming, it was just a deep doubt. Just like the police officers who used to take notes with me. I looked up at him and whispered, I also want to know. So, every time I call the police, I do my best. But they still die before me time and time again. Let me see time and time again. End of this chapter. Chapter 9. Qianhu Tomb. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. Chapter 9. Qianhu Tomb. This time Yang Hui's death is different from the 4 times I have encountered before. Before, those people died in front of me suddenly without any signs. Yang Hui's death, from the very beginning, was aimed at me, and after her death, she left behind many things pointing towards me. So this time I stayed at the police station longer than before. I knew they were going to verify the information I said, so I sat honestly in the lounge waiting. But I don't know why, I've been having occasional nosebleeds lately, and there are also many first-class ones. The female police officer who used to accompany me was afraid that I might have an accident, so she gave me a tissue and asked if I was okay. I stuffed my nose and shook my head. As soon as I shook it twice, I felt like it was spinning around and I fell on my head. Confused, his eyes were filled with blood, as well as the tinkling of bells and the sharp and pleasant meowing of cats. When I woke up again, I was already in the hospital. Outside it was dim again, with an 4 drip on my hand. The female police officer saw me wake up and her face became even more serious, even with sympathy. I have seen this kind of gaze the most from childhood to adulthood. Instinctively, I turned my hand and touched my nose, only to find that it was still stuffed with a cotton ball, but it was uncomfortable due to blood clotting. The policewoman pushed a large stack of examination reports by the bedside towards me and said, Yang Hui's death is not directly related to you for the time being, but because many clues are related to you, you cannot leave this city for now. I nodded to indicate that I knew. This is the test report of your blood draw yesterday, and the test you did after you fell unconscious today. It's acute leukemia. Can you come and treat it with your family? The policewoman looked at me sympathetically and tapped her finger on the report. After explaining a few more words, he stood up, picked up his hat, and left directly. I stared at the stack of horizontal and vertical papers, glanced at the string of data and English nicknames on top, and suddenly felt a bit funny. It's off the charts. How could something like acute leukemia possibly appear in someone like me? Shouldn't it appear on the female lead in a Korean drama who is passionately in love with her lover? Just as I was about to reach out for the test form, the nurse came in and checked my nosebleeds, then asked me to take my temperature. After the thermometer was clamped, I took out something wrapped in a disposable mask from my pocket and handed it to me. Your friend left it under the hospital bed. I only discovered it when I mopped the floor earlier today. I was planning to give it to you when you came to get the test results, but I didn't expect you. Hey. She gave me a sympathetic glance and thrust the ball into my hand, saying, your friend's arm is so swollen that he can't bear to take it off. Take it back and give it back to her. Just as she pushed her over, I heard a few tinkling sounds inside and instantly felt a tingling sensation in my back. Shaking his hands, he untied the bag of the disposable mask and, upon entering the eyes, it was the lotus-shaped bell and gold bracelet that had disappeared from Yang Hui's wrist. When Yang Hui was discharged from the hospital, she was clearly wearing it and deliberately shook the bell in the taxi. In the surveillance footage of the internet cafe, I also saw the bracelet on her wrist. How could it possibly fall into the hospital? Is this back in my hands? The nurse clearly didn't know that Yang Hui was dead, but she just gave me a few sheets to do tomorrow and asked me to start the examination tomorrow. Of course, remember to pay the hospitalization fee. I looked at those 5 or 6 lists that I didn't know what to check, and suddenly remembered Ling Yuan saying, I'm also going to die. Pinching the bracelet, I was about to say that the nurse said she didn't plan to be hospitalized. But the nurse was writing something on paper with a pen, and without looking up, she said, do you still live in Lingyun community? What number of buildings are you in? Now, in order to prevent the epidemic, hospitalization requires registering a specific address. I listened to her words and suddenly remembered that she was the nurse who had heard that I lived in Lingyun community and had an incredulous expression on her face. My heart suddenly clucked for a moment, and I quickly shook my head and said, it's my friend who lives there, I don't live there. What's there in Lingyun community? Is there an explanation? The nurse took out her thermometer and glanced at it, saying, that place used to be a chaotic rocky hill covered in weeds. Our local elderly people call it Qianhu tomb. It is said that foxes often run there and hit the stones inside, sometimes killing several in a day. At that time, people often went to Qianhu tomb to pick up dead foxes and skin them, the nurse said in a somewhat humorous tone. Registering his temperature, he said, later on, when we started developing, the location of the land was very good. Many developers have seen it, and every time there was an accident. One time, we had to excavate, but for some reason, we stopped working. It wasn't until it became the family area of the military factory, and it was said that the soldiers had a strong yang energy, that we managed to suppress it. Although it was a family area, I used to hang the units card, but it couldn't hang steadily every time and even fell and hit someone. Later, it seemed like I had hired a master to calculate and renamed it Lingyun community, which helped me settle down. The nurse said. He smiled helplessly and said, at that time, it was very popular, so none of us locals lived in Lingyun community. She turned her pen sideways and said to the registration form, where do you live now? I was still thinking of Qianhu tomb in my mind, and when I heard her ask where she lived, I suddenly had a joke. Yes, where should I live? Finally, I had to shake my head and return the checklists to the nurse, saying, I don't plan to be hospitalized for the time being. I'll talk about it when my family comes over. The nurse looked at me and probably got used to this kind of thing, but didn't express much. Just whispered, acute leukemia is actually more common than chronic leukemia. Although it is severe, it can still be cured. However, your nosebleeds are quite severe, so you should be careful not to lose blood and cause accidents. Then he didn't say anything more and just took the things and left. I held the gold bracelet, feeling hot to the touch. I threw it directly on the bedside table and checked for acute leukemia with the test report. Cure is indeed possible, but without treatment, there is usually only a survival time of 3 months. Severe, from onset to death, only a few days. Sure enough, I'm dying soon. I took the test form and looked back and forth, but I couldn't see anything. The money in the phone is running low, and looking at the stack of inspection results, it is estimated that the cost of inspection alone will be quite high. After hesitating for a long time, I still called my grandmother. As soon as the phone was connected, I heard my grandmother's familiar hello coming from the other end. I don't know why, but suddenly tears streamed down my face and I opened my mouth, unable to make a sound. Hello. Who? Grandma asked a few questions in confusion, and then urgently, hello, and hello, a few times. After a while, something seemed to come to mind and he kindly said, is it meow meow? I covered my mouth, trying not to cry out loud. Did something happen again? Are you still wearing the jade Buddha? Grandma spoke kindly and cautiously, what can I do for Grandma? Meow meow. Tears were streaming down my face, and I was panting heavily. Grandma, on the other hand, said on her own, why don't you come back, meow meow? Grandma is not afraid. Are you coming back? I'm not going back, Grandma. I quickly turned to my phone and choked up, I don't have any money left. Can you give me some money? Grandma was busy twice and then asked me what was wrong. After venting my emotions, I talked about Yang Hui's suicide. After listening, Grandma remained silent for a long time before saying, take that gold bracelet, find a gold shop, melt it and make a small golden Buddha, find a nearby Taoist temple, and offer it. That Yang Hui died under your name, I'm afraid she'll seek revenge on you, Grandma sighed heavily. Go find Ling Yuan and ask him to come up with a solution for you, he said softly. I was stunned for a moment. Just now, I just said that Yang Hui wore a bracelet and then committed suicide. But without mentioning the small funeral hall and paper figures, how did Grandma know about Ling Yuan? Are you still asking me to find him? Listening to Grandma's tone, it seems like she is very familiar with Ling Yuan and knows that Ling Yuan will help me. End of this chapter. Chapter 10. No Escape. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10. No Escape. I heard my grandmother suddenly mention Ling Yuan and quickly grabbed her phone to ask who Ling Yuan was. How did my grandmother know about him and how could she be sure he would help me? But the grandmother on the other end of the phone just silently listened to my questioning. In the end, he just said in a faint voice, are you 20.4 years old this year? I heard from you, and I've seen Ling Yuan before, haven't I? Go find him. Grandma spoke with a hint of helplessness and hung up on me directly. I held my phone and tried calling back, but there were always busy calls and my heart was in a mess. As soon as I got annoyed, my nosebleed started to flow with a loud noise. While stuffing a cotton ball, I began to sort out things from the Lingyun community. When I rented to Lingyun community, it was actually automatically pushed by the software. I took a look at the nearby and cheaper options, and with the word cloud in the community, it made me, who has been wandering outside and avoiding XZ, feel unfamiliar and close. Ling Yuan, Yun Miao Ling Yuan may really be the key to this matter. After finishing the drip call, I also received 10,000 yuan from my grandmother through my mobile banking. I paid for my medical expenses, took a bracelet, and went straight to the taxi to find a gold shop. This kind of thing with evil energy in unknown origin, even if lost, will come back for various reasons and must be destroyed. The gold shops that can melt gold on site are all on the old street now. When I arrived, it was already very late, and only one gold shop was still shining. The boss is a middle-aged uncle. He looked at the bracelet and measured it twice, but didn't ask where I got it or look at the invoice. It just feels a bit regretful. A bracelet with such good styles and craftsmanship costs a lot just based on the weight. It's a pity that it melted, so let me sell it to him. Melted. I now hear the bell ringing on the bracelet, and my head hurts. You. The boss pinched the bracelet and leaned towards me on the counter. There's a problem with the way, isn't there? Don't worry, leave it with me. If you can't find it, don't melt it to ensure safety. Otherwise, what do you want? I'll exchange it for you, and I won't even ask for your wages. How about that? The boss rubbed the smooth auspicious cloud pattern on the bracelet and reached out to hook the 3 lotus-shaped bell, feeling like he couldn't put it down. This type of gold shop often collects gold jewelry from unknown sources. After all, once gold is melted, no one knows what it used to be. But this bracelet cannot be kept. I stared at the boss and shook my head heavily. No. Melt it now, hit a golden Buddha, a golden bodhisattva, whatever you want. Ah. The boss sighed, weighed in front of me, then turned around and threw it into something like a spoon, adding something to it. He said to me, please register the style and weight in that notebook, and come back later so that I can check. There was indeed an old notebook hanging by the counter. I glanced at the gold bracelet inside the spoon and saw that the boss had already lit the flamethrower, so I went to get the notebook. When I flipped over to the blank space and turned my head again, the blue flames were already whistling into the spoon. Seeing the bracelet melt, my heart couldn't help but relax. After melting, the boss directly poured the mold into it, cooled it down, and reweighed it before giving it to me. I settled the labor cost and held the golden Buddha, feeling incredibly relieved. At least this disaster has been solved. When I came out of the old street, it was already past 10 o'clock in the evening. It was too late for me to go back to Lingyun community alone. I booked a nearby hotel on my phone, and I will go to the hotel to sleep for one night. I will go there at dawn, and the yang energy is strong during the day, which is also safer. I originally wanted to take a taxi on my phone, but it's so late and there hasn't been any response from the old street. I was just thinking about 3 or 4 kilometers, or I'll just walk over and forget about it. But when I think of my grandmother saying that Yang Hui will retaliate against me, I dare not walk alone at night. A taxi happened to stop next to me, so I quickly got in and told the driver about the hotel. The driver gave a light and then started driving. I have had the experience of sleeping in the car last time, so from the moment I got on the car, my whole body was tense and my hands were tightly gripping the jade Buddha on my chest. I just stared at the navigation displayed on my mobile app, as if it was getting further and further away from the hotel I had booked, and the car was driving faster and faster. Although it's only 3 or 4 kilometers away, it's already 5 or 6 kilometers away. The first thing that came to mind was the driver slaughtering customers and cautiously saying, "Master, are you taking the wrong path? Why don't we follow the navigation?" But the driver didn't respond to me, instead he reached out and changed gears, and the speed increased. I suddenly felt something was wrong, so I carefully leaned forward, trying to calm myself down, and said again, "Master, why don't you park here? If you want to go back, just go back." The driver quickly turned the steering wheel and glanced at me. "They're all waiting for you, just go back." As soon as I saw the driver's face, my hair immediately turned cold. It was the one who took me to the hospital that day and had a WeChat profile picture of a black cat. As soon as he finished speaking, he mechanically drove again, the speed getting faster and faster, and the street lights flashed through the car window like shooting stars. I was the first to think of opening the door and jumping, but the car door was locked. Holding the phone, I wanted to make a call, but found that the touch screen of the phone couldn't be clicked. Lying on the car window, I wanted to seek help from passers-by outside, but the speed was so fast that I couldn't even see if anyone was on the side of the road. I have no way to seek help, and even at the fast speed, I dare not do anything to grab the steering wheel from the driver. I knew in my heart where the driver was taking me, so I decided to sit in the back seat with peace of mind. From time to time, he touched the newly beaten golden Buddha and comforted himself. Anyway, sooner or later he will go find Ling Yuan, it's the same whether he goes late or late. On the way, the driver ran several red lights and arrived at Lingyun community. Without any hesitation, he drove straight to the bottom of building 4 and finally stepped on the brake all the way. I lay by the car window, looking at the 4 buildings below, as if they were full of people. Even on the stairs upstairs, there was one person standing on each side every 3 steps. One by one, their faces were dull and they stood straight. It's like welcoming guests, and it's like escort. Behind these people, there was a surging flame. The last time I saw it, the old lady who burned paper sat down at the entrance of the hallway and threw paper figures into the brazier one by one. This time she didn't hide it. Every time she picked up a paper figure, she handed it to me, making me look clearly at the Yun Miao written on the back of the paper figure. And the driver slowly turned his head and said, "Just come back." The car lock also fell with a click, and I looked at the resident standing, knowing that I couldn't escape. From the first day I moved into Lingyun community, it was destined. Pushing open the car door, the taxi immediately stepped on the gas and left. Standing at the entrance and stairs of the 4 buildings, the residents of the community, who looked like welcoming guests, grinned and gave me a terrifying smile when they saw me. Still in the same tone. "Come back, just come back. Go up." The old woman who burned the paper threw a paper figure with my name written on it into the brazier again. "If you don't want to die, go up. He's waiting for you on top, go up." I watched as the bright red flames rolled up the white paper figure, instantly turning it into ashes, and my heart tightened. The day I started having nosebleeds, I came across this old lady burning paper. A paper figure with a name can actually be considered a double. She burns paper time and time again, just to kill me. Who is waiting for me? Ling Yuan. I pulled out a flower from the flower bed with my back hand and rushed towards the old lady who was burning paper. She wants to kill me, so I'll kill her first. I carry a lot of lives on my back. Before I could rush over, those residents with dull faces immediately rushed towards the hallway and blocked the old lady who was burning paper. One hand grabbed my arm fiercely and said in a deep voice, "Don't go." I turned my head and saw Ling Yuan's face shaking towards me. But the old woman who burned the paper chuckled and said, "Ling Yuan, you can't save her. You can't leave this building, how can you save her? Do you think letting that Yang Hui carry her name and shed all her blood is enough to die on her behalf? Or do you just make a secret alliance with her using paper people, and it's enough?" I only feel the cold grip of Ling Yuan's hand as I listen. So it was really Ling Yuan who killed Yang Hui, and even the paper man who got married to the underworld, was it him who did it? End of this chapter.